Hello everyone and welcome back to JAS Reviews. My name is James and on this channel I do reviews of both music and movies, along with the occasional commentary piece, so if any of that sounds interesting to you then please be sure to leave a like on this video and to subscribe to my channel to see more content like that. And today I am bringing you all another episode of quick movie reviews, and as always with these series, both quick movie and quick album reviews, I will try to keep my thoughts on these movies brief, but if I have more to say about a movie, then I will. And similarly to the recent episode of quick album reviews that I made, these movies are going to be from varying degrees of recency, with some of them being even as far back as August, because I just didn't really get the chance to talk about them with how busy life has been lately. But then there will be some that were very recent, that came out as recently as in October. And while we're here, I might as well let you all know that if you see this video, that there will be another video coming very soon for Halloween, where I will do my Halloween special as I've done for the past couple of years, where I am going to be ranking a set of movies from an iconic franchise. I have done two slasher franchises for the past 2 years. Last year I did Friday the 13th, and the year before that I did Halloween. So I'm completing off the trifecta of iconic slashers. Maybe you can guess what I'm doing for the third. I think it should be pretty obvious if you're at all familiar with what many people consider to be the three main slasher villains. But nevertheless, look forward to that. And now, let's not waste any more time, and let's talk about 7 different movies on the docket, starting with the first. Okay, so first on the docket is one of the most popular horror movies of the year. Horror has had a pretty big year this year, with many movies being very successful, and this is another one that's done very well, and that is Weapons. This was definitely one of my most anticipated movies of the years, especially given that it is directed by Zach Cregger, who also directed Barbarian, one of my favorite horror movies of the year it came out, and one of my favorite movies in general of that year. All just mysteriously wake up in the middle of the night and all just sort of walk to this, well, rather run in a very unsettling way to this one location, seemingly for no reason. We can't figure out why they're doing this. And the movie's building up, the townspeople trying to figure this out, centering on a couple of main characters, while also doing a little bit of analyzing about how a small town would respond to a tragedy like this. And I think all of that adds up to make a very interesting product, especially when the reveal happens of what is actually going on in this town and why these children disappeared. It creates a very foreboding story, but one that can be very fun and engaging to watch at the same time. I like a lot of the characters in this. I think there are a lot of interesting stories going on, and I think it's pretty cool that this movie goes into different perspectives. You get I like a lot of the characters in this. I think there are a lot of interesting stories going on, and I think it's pretty cool that this movie goes into different perspectives. You get different sides of the story at different times, and it makes the timeline a little bit disjointed, purposefully so, but it's cool how the movie clues you in as to when things are happening in the timeline of events. I think Julia Garner is great as Justine. She has only continued to grow as an actress since Ozark, although I do still think her work in Ozark is the best that she's done, but she's really good in this, and she creates a very sympathetic character in this teacher who all the kids seem to be within her class, and only one kid remained in her classroom. So you have to see her dealing with this and perhaps getting blamed for it as well. I also find Josh Brolin's character of Archer pretty interesting. I think he puts on a very good portrayal of a troubled father who clearly has, as you follow the movie along more, has a complicated relationship with how he's raised his son, especially considering that his son is revealed to be a bully later on in the story. So there's that sense of guilt going on, but there's also the sense that he wants to do anything he can to find his son, and anything he can to really just bring these kids back. Alden Ehrenreich is also great in this as Paul, and I actually found his story and Austin Abrams' character James to be the most intriguing part of the movie in many ways. Their story was very energetic, and the way they interconnected with one another was interesting and funny at the same time. Austin Abrams' James character is actually one of the most key characters in here. He essentially just seems like he's maybe going to be a bit of a side character, as he's someone who is struggling with drug addiction and is just sort of a casual criminal, but he is the one who ends up revealing some pretty important aspects of the plot. But then there is the biggest highlight of the movie, and spoilers if you have not seen the movie yet, but Amy Madigan is just excellent as Gladys, who is revealed to be the driving force behind everything that happens in this movie. The way they reveal her very subtly and building her up is very interesting, but then there's a point where it goes off the rails with her character, and it works in my opinion, the best way possible. This movie is paced really well. I think it has some good scares in it and some good tension. If there were any critiques I were to give to the movie, and there are a couple, I do think that some of the characters, just because we have so many characters, I feel like some were just sort of told how they feel and told what their personality traits are rather than shown. And that could make it a little hard to connect to most of the characters beyond Justine and Archer, who I do think we get to know a lot more of their inner lives. I do think the ending of the movie comes a bit out of nowhere as well, but it is also a pretty cool ending, and I do like the sort of realistically dark tone that we get with the movie's conclusion, where we're told basically that the kids are maybe going to recover to some degree, but they'll never really get over this trauma, and I think it feels like a very realistic conclusion. This is a great movie all around, just such a fun horror watching experience. I highly recommend it if you haven't seen it. Definitely one of my favorite movies of the year. Strong 4 out of 5 stars for me. Next up is the highest grossing horror movie of the year. It's actually impressive that this late into its franchise that it continues to earn so much money. But supposedly this is going to be the last in the franchise too, although I sort of have my doubts considering how well it did. But it's The Conjuring, The Last Rites, the fourth in the mainline Conjuring series, and the one that is supposedly concluding both Ed and Lorraine Warren's story with the last case that they went on. And yeah, I have some interesting opinions on The Conjuring, I would say. I absolutely love the first two Conjurings. I think they're both great. After The Conjuring 2, I think that The Conjuring sort of lost what made it great, and unfortunately I think they lost why James Wan made The Conjurings work so well as they franchised it and made it almost like a Marvel horror universe, and it really cheapened a lot of stuff that the mainline first two movies were going for. They made side movies for Annabelle the doll, and for The Nun, and for La Llorona. It was just all too much, and I really do think what keeps people coming back, at least to the main Conjuring series, is Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga's excellent chemistry and superb performances as Ed and Lorraine. I'll admit that's what's kept me coming back to the main Conjuring series. Even with The Conjuring 3, which I wasn't a huge fan of, and if anything has only shrunk on me over time. If you embrace what The Conjuring is, then I think you'll have a good time with this movie. I don't think The Last Rites is bad at all. Now, is it one of the best horror movies of the year? No. Horror has had a pretty good year this year, much like last year, and because of that, I don't think that this one really holds a candle to the best that we've gotten this year, like Sinners or Weapons. But there are still some moments that stand out here. I do like that it's more of a return to form, whereas I think The Conjuring 3 lost the plot in a lot of ways. This one is more of a return to them going back to a haunted house and dealing with an entity that is of the demonic and trying to basically get rid of it. I understand that they're sort of trying to match the big climax that happened in The Conjuring Part 2, but at least The Conjuring Part 2 had moments that were a bit grounded even in the midst of all the craziness that was happening in the climax, and I don't think it holds the same charm either. It just feels like a bit too much, and I mean, honestly, the best comparison I can make is, once again, this feels like a horrific Marvel movie in its climax, and that really does cheapen some of the attempts at scares they are trying to do later on. Now, the build-up to this climax is actually very well done. I like the pacing of the scares earlier on. I think there are some pretty effective jump scares in here, and there are some good, creepy, atmospheric moments. Once again, like the other Conjurings, the biggest highlight here is the chemistry between Ed and Lorraine, aka Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga's excellent performances. I think both of them are awesome here. Patrick Wilson in particular is great in this movie. I really liked him in this one and found his story to be very interesting, and it was easy to sympathize with him in dealing with these heart attacks that he's been having and how this last one could be the very last one if he's not careful. Lorraine continues to be a very interesting character and definitely the anchoring of the Conjuring series, as she is the one who is most connected with experiencing what the demonic is like, and Farmiga continues to play this convincingly and never turns Lorraine into too much of a parody or a cartoon character. She takes the character seriously, and I appreciate that. So, yeah, overall, this movie is very flawed. Michael Chavez is just not as strong of a director as James Wan is, and I think it is a little unfortunate that he was the one who really took the reins of the Conjuring series, because I do think he just really plays too much into over-the-top tendencies. But I can't deny that I also had a pretty fun time with this one. Solid 3 out of 5 stars for me. Next up is the finale to a TV series that eventually got turned into a 3-movie sequel series as well, with Downton Abbey, the grand finale. I only went into it out of curiosity when actually the first Downton movie was coming out a couple years back. In 2019, I believe it was. Either 2019 or 2020. And the only reason I checked out the series was because the movie looked interesting to me, and I was absolutely shocked with what I got. Yes, there is a little bit of a British soap opera element to the series, but I think it's a lot more than that. I think it's actually a pretty interesting commentary on class relations, and I think there's a lot of really deep and well-realized characters. Some of my favorite characters I've seen on TV, like Lady Grantham and Thomas Barrow and Tom Branson. And for the most part, I would have compared the first 2 movies to the later seasons of Downton, where it wasn't as well done as the first 3 seasons. The biggest problem I had with the movies was that, much like the later seasons of Downton, there wasn't as much weight with what the characters were going through. It felt a little bit too just like we're going through the motions and characters are just sort of living their lives. But at the same time, I understood why the movies were doing that, because we've seen these characters struggle so much, particularly Mr. and Mrs. Bates and Mary Crawley, so it made sense why they wanted to keep them happy. So I was hoping for something a little different with this 3rd movie, especially given that it is being called the grand finale. I was actually a little surprised that they were coming out with a 3rd one, because it really did seem like the 2nd movie ended everyone's arc pretty satisfyingly, particularly the main arc that we were looking for, which was that Mary Crawley was going to continue on the legacy of Downton as the new head of Downton Abbey. I was a little worried that they were going to cheapen things and try to rehash things and it would be too much, but instead we actually got the best Downton movie out of all of them. It really felt like Julian Fellowes and Michael Knowles went into this with a purpose, as well as all the actors who clearly have so much love and affection for these characters they're playing. And it creates a very satisfying conclusion, and actually the first movie of the series that I think matches up to the first 3 seasons. It's actually been a good while since we've seen Downton have a little bit of weight to it, so it was nice to see them coming back to those roots here, particularly through the characters of Mary Crawley and Lord Grantham. Mary has divorced her husband that she marries in the later seasons of Downton Abbey, and I think that's actually probably for the best, because he wasn't a particularly interesting character in my opinion, and I've always been convinced that Mary really just loved Matthew and no one was going to replace that love for her. And this movie sort of confirms that. I'll talk about that in a little bit, but it was just really interesting to see the movie giving her this material to deal with, essentially coping with her being a divorced woman. And I think that Michelle Dockery nails it here. She gives maybe her best performance as Lady Mary ever, as Lord Mary Crawley, and I'd say she's a very significant highlight of this movie. There are so many other great arcs going on as well. I also do think that Lord Grantham, and he's another character where I don't really consider myself a huge fan of him, but he is another one that's given a lot of tough material here, and I think Hugh Bonneville absolutely nails the tough material he's given here, as he's having to reckon with giving the reins to Lady Mary, and in turn recognize that he is getting older and that he will need to move on from this position. It's also pretty inspiring to see how much Lady Edith, Laura Carmichael playing this character, is ready to go to war for Lady Mary, essentially. She is ready to defend her sister as a divorced woman and ready to fight against society's expectations. This is such an inspiring conclusion for Lady Mary and Lady Edith's relationship, because If you remember from the earlier seasons, Lady Edith was ready to blackmail Lady Mary for what she had done when she had an affair with Mr. Pamuk. Now we've moved to where she is ready to defend her from being divorced. And Laura Carmichael continues to be one of the best in the series of Downton. I've always loved her performance as Edith, and she is just superb here as well. There are so many other things I could commend about this movie, so many other great aspects of it. I like, for an example, that they give Mr. and Mrs. Bates more to do, particularly Mrs. Bates. What really puts this movie over the top for me is the excellent ending montage where we get to see Downton characters of the past on screen. It could have been cheap and cheesy, but instead it was done in a way that was very touching and poignant. We got to see Lady Grantham on screen, we got to see Matthew Crawley, and I love that this movie sort of subtly implies that yes, Matthew Crawley is Mary's true love and will always be the one that she loves for the rest of her life. What was really surprising was that they showed Lady Sybil on screen. We haven't seen her at all since season 3, not even a flashback image of her in other Downton movies. I was very surprised by that, but it worked very well, and it sort of reaffirms the main idea behind Downton, that all these lives that were in Downton, they had an effect on people, and that we move forward, but we also recognize the lives that have impacted us. There are a couple critiques I have for this movie that are overall very minimal. I didn't really care for what they did with Mr. Mosley. He felt a little out of character in this, and I also felt that they really didn't do much with many of the servant characters. Thomas Barrow isn't in this movie that much, but that was actually okay with me because they really finished his arc 2 times already, so it didn't feel like they really needed much to do with him. And Mr. and Mrs. Hughes aren't in the movie that much, as well as Miss Patmore is just sort of given a sort of throwaway conclusion, although it was okay. Actually, the servant they give the most attention to is Daisy, and I think it did work with what they did with her, but I would have liked a little bit more attention given to the serving staff, considering how very important they were to the TV series. Still, the characters that they did pay attention to, they clearly had a purpose for, and I think it worked very well. This is a great movie, one of my favorites of the year. 4 out of 5 stars. Now we're moving into more recent movies that have come out within the past month and even October, and the first one we're going to be talking about is Him. The trailers for this one intrigued me. A football horror movie? It sounded a little strange, but it sounded like something that could work. I was much more hesitant for this movie when it started getting panned and got more negative reviews, but I still went into it with an open mind, and I didn't hate this, although I do totally understand why many people don't like it. I do think it has a lot of flaws. I do think it has 2 pretty good lead performances. I think that Tyreek Withers is good as Cam, although he has some moments where he's maybe underperforming a bit. I do think he has a lot of potential here, and there's a particularly emotive scene with him where he's talking about his very complicated relationship with his father that I thought worked very well and was actually pretty powerful. Marlon Wayans is a big highlight here as Isaiah. I thought he played this character excellently. I liked how unpredictable he played him. You can never really figure out what this character's motivations are, which is a little bit of a problem plot-wise. I'll get into that in a second. But for the character itself and for how Marlon Wayans played him, I thought it worked pretty well. This movie has an interesting underlying commentary about masculinity and football, about the toxic sides of it, and how far you will go to push yourself to be the greatest. I like the movie when it is pursuing that arc, but I do think that somewhere along the line it loses that, and instead wants to go for some flashy visuals that feel like they'd fit more in just a music video than a movie. I do think the visuals are cool in this movie, but at the end of the day, a lot of them don't mean that much. I also do think that the horror in this movie isn't executed particularly well. I actually like it better when it is more of a straightforward sports movie, surprisingly. When it shifts into the horror aspects, it actually becomes a lot less interesting. And it also does take a while for the horror stuff to pop up, which is maybe another reason why the horror doesn't really work at all. If it had been more consistent throughout, I could have seen it working, but it's not really a part of the movie's identity until halfway through, so it becomes a very disjointed mess. I do think there's some stuff to commend about this movie, but I do also think there's some definite flaws. Not much else to say about it. It's pretty straightforward what my feelings are about this movie, but if you were mildly interested in it, I'd actually recommend giving it a shot because there are some cool aspects to it, and I do think it is an interesting watching experience at the least. 2.5 out of 5 stars for me. Next up was a horror movie that I was very intrigued by, Good Boy, which is from the perspective of a dog who is seeing their owner being possessed by spirits, and the dog wants to save them. This was such a cool idea for a horror movie, and we have seen a lot of movies recently that go into the perspective of another character. A lot of horror movies that have done this. Last year we had In a Violent Nature, which went into the perspective of the killer, and this year we had the movie Presence, which went into the perspective of a ghost that was watching a family, and now we have this that is going into the perspective of a dog. And this is actually the first one where I would say it works more often than it didn't. I wasn't really a big fan of In a Violent Nature, and I definitely wasn't a big fan of Presence this year. I found that one to be very underwhelming, but this one, I think this one generally works for the most part. Now, I will go ahead and take the flaws out of the way because I think they're pretty easy to identify. I think the story itself is not super interesting when you take out the commodity of the movie being from the perspective of a dog. It's a pretty basic horror movie about a character being haunted by demons, and what's more, it is definitely a symbolic horror movie. It is a very sad story, and I think the symbolic narrative works, but it is one that is maybe a little basic and wouldn't be as interesting if the dog wasn't here at all. I also do think the human actors are not very good here. I didn't really care for Shane Jensen as the main talking character, Todd, the dog Indy's owner. He just wasn't super interesting in the movie, and I didn't find it in my heart much to sympathize with him. I mean, just none of the human characters are that interesting, but thankfully, a lot of that is remedied by how well this movie does with filming the dog Indy. It helps that Indy just has a naturally very emotive look to his face. He always looks very quizzical and very curious about the world, and it makes him very fun to follow along with. I just loved following along with this dog, and it was easy to root for him, and yeah, I mean, if you're a dog lover, you'll like this movie. It's a lot of fun, and I think the scares are solid. Although I wasn't ever super scared by this movie, I do think they're executed solidly, and it's actually interesting to watch the post-credits sequence of this movie where they talk about how they filmed the dog and how they made it look believable that he was scared or concerned about his owner. So this was a good watch, just not something that's going to be one of my favorite movies of the year. 3 out of 5 stars for me. Next up is another in a long series of Stephen King adaptations we've had over the years, The Long Walk. And I am always interested to see what is done with a Stephen King movie adaptation because there's always different types of styles that directors go for. But this one is definitely a much more grounded movie, and one of Stephen King's more straightforward stories where there's not really a horror element to it. It's more of a thriller than anything else. And it's also very dystopian, which is not really a genre we see Stephen King tackling that often. But I think all those elements work to great effect in this movie, and it makes for one of my favorite movies of the year easily. One of my top 3 right now, I would say. I absolutely loved this. Thought it was an excellent watching experience from beginning to end. It stays consistently tense. You are consistently on edge, waiting for the pin to drop for the main characters in this movie, as the main premise is that they are going on a walk across the world to try to inspire a sense of patriotism in the world around them that is crippled and just basically economically downtrodden due to the dystopian nature of it. But if the characters ever stop walking, then they are shot and killed after given a couple of warnings. So we get these 2 main characters that are played very well by Cooper Hoffman and David Johnson, Raymond and Peter, who both seem to be the most ambitious in the movie and both seem very driven to win the walk. And both of them have very different wishes, which is represented by their philosophy on life and how they view the world they're in. Raymond wants to kill the general in the movie, who is seemingly the leader of the dystopian world and a representation to him of everything wrong with the world they're in. However, Peter is much more of an optimist, and he wants to make the world a better place, so his wish is to actually have 2 people win the walk rather than 1, so that there can be a little bit more hope. it's interesting to see their perspectives clashing, but also how they become best friends in the story. And really, the story is at its best when it is focusing on their inspiring friendship and how the two help each other in the midst of this very dark society. This is a pretty grim movie and not the easiest to watch in the world, so it's nice that there's a little bit of levity there with that central friendship. And there are also some other really good performances in this. I think Garrett Werbing is good as Stebbins and has a pretty interesting reveal that happens. I sort of figured it out before it happened, but I think that was also part of the point in the movie, was that you were supposed to figure out who he was, and it makes his character a lot more intriguing as you think about him more. Charlie Plummer is also unsettlingly good as this very despicable character, Gary. I found him to be deeply unlikable, and for a good reason, but he was played very well by Charlie Plummer. It was cool to see Ben Wang, who was in the Karate Kid movie that I reviewed earlier this year as Hank Olsen. I think he was even better in this movie. The ending of the movie was, oh, man, it was so impactful in how it was executed. It wasn't the ending I was expecting, and part of me was wondering if it was even a good ending at first, or one that made sense for the story, especially considering that it is due to a decision that David Johnson's character Peter makes. But as I thought about it more, the more I realized, yeah, the decision does make sense. And it is very much so fitting in the grim world that the characters are living in. So yeah, it's one that I think could be controversial for some watchers, but I do think it's one that works. This is a pretty excellent movie all around. Not many issues with it. I absolutely love this. 4.5 out of 5 stars for me. And finally, let's end off with a movie that has been much hyped up this year and is one that many people are saying could very well win the Best Picture at the Oscars, and that is Paul Thomas Anderson's latest One Battle After Another. And after seeing it, yeah, I get why people are saying this could be a Best Picture winner. For one, it's commentary about the state of America, of modern America specifically, and especially due to how we treat immigrants, is one that's very relevant to right now and feels very much so of our time. It feels like Paul Thomas Anderson has his finger on the pulse. And I like that he also treats us with some very flawed main characters, but also realistic ones who are trying to fight against what they feel like is a corrupt system within America, but do it in some ways that could be very dangerous and make them rather complex characters. I think that, in particular, Leonardo DiCaprio really nails his performance as a revolutionary who sort of is washed up later in the movie and has seen failures happen time and time again, and so has sort of dropped out of trying to be a revolutionary entirely, and instead is just trying to take care of his daughter Willa, who has been abandoned by their mother Perfidia after she had supposedly betrayed them to the FBI, specifically to Colonel Stephen Lockjaw, played by Sean Penn. But, of course, things catch up, and the government eventually is finding these revolutionaries and is wanting to take them out. And because of this, Willa's character, who is really sort of an unwitting victim in all of this at first, has to be taken away to somewhere safe. It adds up to a movie that is very complex and has a lot of moving parts in it, and I think almost all of them work to excellent degree. Like I said, Leonardo DiCaprio's performance is excellent here. I think it might be one of his best to date, which is really impressive considering that he also put on one of maybe his best performances as well in Killers of the Flower Moon a couple of years ago. But I think he might even be better here. He is so funny in many parts. He has some scenes that really were making me laugh out loud. I also think that Sean Penn is superb as Lockjaw. This character is maybe one of the best antagonists I've seen on screen this year. They give him a lot of depth, and I don't think they ever make him into too much of a cartoon character. I think there is danger of him becoming almost a little bit too over the top, but Sean Penn plays it so well that it never becomes that. And Benicio del Toro might be my favorite in this movie as Sensei Sergio. I really liked what he did with this character, and he was a cool contradiction to everyone else, as he was very calm and collected and just sort of moved forward and went with the flow. It was very fitting for his character. Chase Infinity is also superb in this, in a very early role for her as Willa. I think she has a lot of potential in her, and yeah, I'm really excited to see where she goes. Tiana Taylor as Perfidia is in this movie for a very short amount of time, and is a character that I think could just be looked at as entirely unlikable based on the decisions she makes, both to abandon her family as well as betray herself and her revolutionary movement to the cops. But I think there's more to her than that, and I think a lot of that is due to the really subtle and well done writing by Paul Thomas Anderson, as well as Taylor's very layered performance. There is some great action in this movie, including one of the best car chase sequences I've seen in recent memory. The way it's filmed is just so energetic and intriguing to watch. And yeah, I mean, as the movie unfolds, you're just constantly along for the ride. Not many issues with this one. I do think sometimes it can be a little bit long for its own good, and it feels like they're constantly trying to wrap up loose ends by the time the movie is over, and that's why they had to make the movie so long. But this isn't really that big of an issue to me. It feels more like nitpicking than anything else. This is another top favorite movie of the year for me. I would be shocked if it leaves my top 5. Very strong 4.5 out of 5 stars for me. So yeah, that ends this episode of Quick Movie Reviews. What were your thoughts on the movies I talked about, if you've seen any of them? Let me know in the comments down below. And once again, my name is James, and I do reviews of both music and movies, along with the occasional commentary piece, so if any of that sounds interesting to you, then please like this video and subscribe to my channel to see more content like that. But until then, I will see you all in the next video.